Okay, welcome to our podcast here at Free Arkansas. Today we're happy to have Senator King and Representative Duffield. Matt and I have this podcast, and what we're really trying to do at Free Arkansas, it's really about freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and we want to be able to sort of pit the statistics of where our state sits against the things that we're doing to improve the state. And our premise is that if we can have open, honest conversations about things, that we can make incremental improvements to our state, so that oftentimes or in the future we won't look at lists and be on the bottom of lists that are good things and top of the list that are bad things. And I think if we keep that as a framework, it's something that can be in service of quality of life, standard of living, better regulations and taxation for our citizens. And so that's really the point. You can go to freearkansas.com and we've got all sorts of statistics put up there. Feel free to comment on anything that you want to say. If we get it wrong, you don't like what we say, just take your shots, not a problem. And so, Matt, what would you say that I sort of missed about why we're doing what we're doing?
Well, I think what you said, the important issue here is state. It's all about the state of Arkansas, and we need more citizens to get involved in these statewide issues, because this is where we can really make change that locally, that the citizens here are going to feel it and we're going to see it. And our goal essentially is, I believe, is to make Arkansas a better place for everybody. So I think you summed that up, and I believe this show is the place to be, to have those discussions, and we're going to have different legislators and people from the state of Arkansas on. But our goal ultimately, Andy, I think that you and I have shared from day one, is to make Arkansas better. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much that simple. And we're super excited to have Senator King here with us today. Senator King, thank you very much for taking a little time to talk to us. Just for everybody listening, can you give us the highlight film on yourself?
Yeah, my brother and I operate a farm that my grandparents purchased way back in the 1920s. In near Green Forest, Arkansas. And so we're in the contract poultry business. So your business is kind of right up our alley. We have Tyson plants out there, and in Carroll County, the largest employers. Agriculture is number one employer in my district. And if you look in that, the poultry industry is the number one in the agriculture sector of that. So I have so we've been in that business for 35 years now. We also have cattle. My dad, who's 88, is still around. So that's a little bit of basic about me. I was a former election commissioner back 25 years ago as a Republican. I was a Republican county chairman 25 plus years ago. So I've been around in politics a long time, Republican politics. Currently I represent Senate District 28, which is all of Carroll, all of Madison, most of Boone, most of Newton County, and the top part of Johnson and Franklin County.
Got it. I'm just curious, you run any cows up there, and does your dad still like to get out there and kick it a little bit?
Yeah, he does. He's 88 and he gets out. It's almost like flipped with your parents, than when we were 14 years old running around there. It's like now with dad, it's like, where's he at? What's he doing? But he still tries to be around. He drove a truck for 66 years. And then, of course, but last few years he hasn't driven a truck. But so yeah, he still gets out and does some stuff and chews me and my brother out when he thinks we need it, which is a lot. So.
Yeah, it's I have a lot of friends who I think are addicted to not addicted, but they love working out in their fields. They just can't get out of it. So anyway, before we get into our conversation about prisons, one of the things I was just curious. I was reading the other day, I guess down at the State House, we're talking about moving the primary. It may not be a big deal, but I'm just curious. Do you guys have an opinion, like, why move the primary? I don't know, Matt, can you give us what you got, not hoping I'm not catching you cold on it, but.
Yeah, no, actually I had communicated this with Senator King earlier today, because my first question is, when I see something like that, is why? And I think Brian can address that some more. But basically today, I don't know if it's going to be on the House floor today or not. I think it may be, but I'm curious to see what they have to say as to why that would change. I mean, my first inclination is, what about the potential for weather? Because, as we know here in Arkansas, there's a lot less chance for poor weather in May, at least as far as winter weather is concerned, as it is in March. So it wasn't one of those where all of my alarms went up. It was just kind of a question of, well, why are we doing this? And I think that Senator King has some ideas on that as well.
Senator?
Yeah, I mean, so I was down here when we changed it, whenever we basically were moving up to have Super Tuesday, because previously in presidential, we were so late in May that the presidential races were decided by then. So that was making us more important and getting us with a bigger group of states. And so I supported that. I mean, we've seen, I think, turnout goes up. You can see turnout in the primary after the presidential primary is already decided that, sometimes people do not get out and vote. So I think it was just getting more participation and being more relevant. And I think that, this bill moving it up in governor elections will be, just trying to remember that, hey, we're not 1 year having it this year and 1 year having it next year. And,
So
we can always
consistency.
change it back. So,
Yeah, like just to be consistent. Does that, I'm just curious, does that change when people can start like putting all their stuff up? Does it mean we're gonna have more time that the campaigning will go on, or is it really just when, well, I guess yes, right?
Yeah, I mean, asking politicians when they're going to vote, I mean, Matt, I mean, like, we're going to put it up as early as possible.
Of course.
I really think that moving it up in March, I think, I just went through a March primary, 3 years ago. So, or a May primary, but I think it does help. I think it gives people the winter time where, you get in May, you get the end of the school year, so I think it's just better to have it then. You start having even runoff elections in June, well then it gets really hard, because when you have the runoff elections out of the primary, you get into summer months, families traveling, only a week of primary runoff voting. So I think it's going to be good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about prisons. And so I know we're ultimately going to get to what's going on in Franklin County and the governor's proposal and your thoughts on that, and maybe even counter ideas. But I wanted to start as sort of a philosophical view, just to see where you guys stood, in sort of the pendulum between prisons as sort of a punishment and deterrent, or detriment, as a punishment, but to deter people from doing crimes, as versus just keeping everybody safe. And I realize they overlap, but I'm just curious if you just have a personal view feel more strongly about one versus the other one. Senator?
Yeah, I mean, I think this issue, so I came in 2006, and we saw our crime rate dropping from 2006 to 2012. Governor Beebe, a Democrat, in 10 and 11 and 13, he started having budget trouble. The recession hit. We were a lag state. So whenever any politician gets in budget trouble, Democrat, Republican, one of the biggest cost measures they'll look to reduce costs to try and save their budgets is let dangerous people out of jail. And that's exactly what happened. So in 2011, Senator Luker and some others, and a lot of Republicans down here at that time were down here, they voted for a bill called the Public Protection Act. I tell people a lot, if the better a bill sounds at the title, usually it's worse. I mean, it's just like hidden. And that's what happens. And basically it was letting people out of prison. We saw our crime rate start to go up in of course, 13 and 14 and 15, with these dangerous people that were let out of jail early for money reasons. You've seen where Republicans took over the legislature in 13 and then a governor in 14. And so you saw that they wouldn't give money. Everything takes money down here. So you saw that corrections budget was 8% when I came in 18 years ago. It is still 8% of the budget. So you're having to build prisons, but you're not giving the allotted money to corrections to keep up. And public safety as a percentage went down. So when you don't take care of those things, you have a high crime rate. The next problem you have is when you have a high crime rate for an extended amount of time, you overburden probation parole, you and underfund them, you underfund public defenders, you put more people in the court system, you're shoving more, and when you have high crime, you're shoving more criminals through the system, and you're not keeping them locked up, and so you just don't have the money. And I think that's where Republicans deserve the criticism. It's not Joe Biden, it's not these other high crime issues. Republicans were not funneling the money they should to take care of the crime rate and keep up with corrections, and that's why we have what I call the three-headed monster. We have high crime, we have high overcrowding, and a high incarceration rate. And so that's why I'm hoping my solutions will be definitely more physically responsible and make sense, and try and tackle those three things rather than build one mega prison in Franklin County. which mega prisons in other states we've seen are mega financial disasters. So
Yeah. Matt, I'm curious on you. So, okay, the balance between safety and punishment, there's also a balance between cost and safety, right? I mean, so we don't have unlimited funds, right? So give me your sort of perspective on those different axes.
Well, I think I'll start with what is the entire purpose of having a prison and having a cage. And so from my standpoint, the people that need to be inside of a cage and locked up are people who are a threat to society. They're a threat to people out of it. So
Agreed.
I think I kind of like to start there with why prison, because, we grow up in this country and we're around things and we see things and they just kind of willy-nilly pass us by and we don't really give it a lot of thought as to why. So I think I'd kind of like to start with that. And as Senator King said, everything's got a price, everything's got a cost, and there's a balancing act to state funds and the state budget. And the senator's been really good to me since I've come down here, because I've been down here 2.5 years, and he's been around much longer than that, so he knows the history on some of this stuff and has been around in a lot of the technical aspects of it. I feel like I've got a good common sense approach to it, and that is to serve the people and the will of the people and what's best. But when you get into the technical aspects down here, that's another ball game, and he's been around and he knows the history of that and knows that. But there's got to be a balancing act, and when it comes to prisons, we all agree on one thing: they're not cheap to build, and they take time to build. It takes a lot of planning to do it and do it correctly.
So I'm going to give you some statistics, and we've got them all listed on our website, and we have the links to various organizations that are involved in, criminal advocacy and reform and just other aspects are related to incarceration. And so, Senator King, you're exactly right. Arkansas does have a high incarceration rate. Ours is about 9 people per 1,000. So we have, a tremendous amount of people in jail. Approximately 91,000 people that are incarcerated in Arkansas. That's the 3rd highest in the United States, and it's significantly above the average, which is 6 out of 1,000. So we're over 100% capacity, so we're definitely over capacity. We definitely have a lot of people. And then our crime rate, not shockingly, is also high. We're ranked. There's different statistics out there. So as we look at various sites that put this up, and a lot of them are pulling stuff out of FBI databases, but we're a top 5 in violent crime. We're a top 5, 6 in property crime as well. Now there's a few cities that sort of take us more, so it's not every place is violent. And so I want to get your reaction to that, but let me just tee up my own thoughts here for a second. So I look at it and so I feel pretty safe in Arkansas. So I don't, of course I live in Yell County. And so, in Pope County too, but I don't ever feel all that unsafe here. What do you guys think the issue is? And let's just go one at a time. Let's just start with crime rates in general. Like, what makes us different here? Why do you think we've got more crime?
Yeah, I think number one, when I get back to Republicans taking over, they did not commit the money to public safety. Basically, Medicaid was 24% of the budget when I went in. It's now 32%. Education was almost 45%. It's fluctuated between 39 and 41%. So whenever our state budget's like a balloon, when you expand in one area, you're going to contract in others. And that gets back to the figures a lot of times people gave are just not correct. They're political figures or they're done by consultants, which, will give the wrong statistics out there for you to vote on, and then you find out later. So I think the high crime rate is we haven't invested in public safety and haven't invested in corrections. And we've been, as I went back to 2011, if you go back and can see the statistics when we started letting people out. And you're right, I represent rural counties. We're overall pretty good. I mean, a lot of times we have the crime we have that is so prevalent now, and we worry about it's like in our farm. I call them the low tire, low gas gang. They pull up on your farm, and then they got a low tire, low gas. And, if you're home, and if you're not home, they throw in 800, 1,200 worth of stuff, and they're gone. If you see the violent crime and even property crime, I mean, we're having a lot of property crime and even a lot of unreported property crime, because sometimes when people get $300 to $500, they don't even report it.
Yeah.
So basically, it's going to take money to do that. And like I said, when you have high crime for a long time, You have, probation parole is underfunded, overworked, and understaffed, and they're underfunded. And so, public defenders, all part of our court system, these dominoes fall. If we don't reduce the crime rate first, we're just going to have to build more prisons. And this prison project, I believe, will bankrupt this state if we're not bankrupted already as far as the cash flow when you look at the overall cost of putting everything in these mega prisons.
Matt, do you have anything to think about any one of those three axes? How many people are in jail, so the total incarceration rate, the fact that we've overcapacity, or even just to stop it in the first, anything thoughts that you throw in?
I think we need to look at the eclectic nature of our state and the makeup. And in conversations with Senator King, we've discussed about the crime is specifically in certain counties and certain areas. And what was that statistic you told me, Brian, where the crime is very much in just certain areas? I know you've got those numbers in your head.
Yeah. I think Pulaski County is 13% of the population, but they're contributing 21% of the inmates. And right now, if you look at the inmates in incarceration and county backlog, 67% only originate from just 8 counties.
Yeah. And I can tell you and these aren't statistics. The statistics that I've seen where they break it down by city, there are some cities that are pretty high, like Pine Bluff would be an example where there's more crime, and Greenbrier is super low. Those are just two ones that I remember. We have the link so you can go look at them yourself. None of this is free. So Senator King, I think you're right in terms of just if we don't do things on the front side, it's super expensive. We're spending, and I don't know if you've got different numbers, but approximately $23,000 per inmate per year, and that doesn't include all the infrastructure. And that's not cheap. But before I switch to that, I'm curious, do we think that there's one of the reasons is that we're putting in people in jail for small stuff? I mean, just let me give a silly example. I sat on one of the statewide boards where I had to submit a disclosure schedule. And I don't know this to be factual, what I'm about to say, but my guess is if I filled out that form incorrectly, that I would be subject to, if you read the fine print, a fine and or a jail sentence. But I don't think they're sending people to jail because you didn't get your form filled out correctly. But is there a problem where we're sending a bunch of people that really aren't violent to jail?
Well, let me interject this real quick, Andy. If I see you in Russellville this weekend, if you and I get a sweet tooth and decide we want to go get an entire box of Snickers from the local Dollar General, we can go in there and we'll just take the box and leave. Because right now there's not the prison space even at the county level, or they're not arresting people for shoplifting.
I see.
And to me, so what I'm getting is this is a problem not just on the big end, but the small scale as well. Because when people are essentially allowed to be a legal thief and they can go in and steal things, irregardless of the purpose, the way I was raised, a thief is a thief, and again, I'm not one to necessarily judge if I was in a situation, I'm broke and I'm down and out and my kids are hungry and they need diapers and they need food. Who's to say what a man may or may not do? But the fact remains is when people are not being punished for shoplifting, that's not good.
But
So from my view, the entire system needs work.
And maybe, Senator King, this is where you're going, but do you think that one thing that someone might say, and I don't know this, I'm just asking, if there's 91,000 people in jail, how many of them are for nonviolent crimes that are more technical things that they're in jail for? Hey, I didn't get my car registered and I got pulled over for it, and I don't have the money to do it, and so you get thrown in jail. I mean, do we have a problem with that? I guess I'm just asking. What do you think, Senator?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues is, and like I said, this high crime rate, this problem it started in 2011. So we've had basically almost now going on 14, 15 years of this high crime rate, and it just kept getting worse. And I tell people in government all the time, it's like milk, you pull it out of your refrigerator, it goes to smelling, and instead of taking and dressing it right then, they just keep sticking it back. And that's what's happened in a simple sense. But I think you see a lot of repeat offenders. I know in our rural counties, they haven't done the violent crime yet, but they've been to corrections 8, 9 times. So they get sentenced to corrections because they have no room, because politicians, Republicans, have not been funding corrections and public safety. So they get sentenced, and they're sentenced 8, 9 times to corrections, and they go and they serve a 5-year sentence, and then they're out in 10 months. So there's really no deterrent to get those people off the street. And that's where you see a lot of this, the shoplifting. They don't pay attention to shoplifting. When I grew up in the rural towns, there was almost no shoplifting. Now it's an everyday occurrence. And I think this whole thing of like, there is a crowd of people out there that do not accept responsibility or rehabilitation. And that's where we've got to get it's going to take a substantial amount of money to address the crime rate. If we don't do that to stop all this stuff, let me just tell you, we could build 3 prisons right now and still not be any better off than we are. And so that's why, reducing the crime rate is the number one goal that we need to do to stop these dominoes from falling towards everything else that we deal with.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, for me personally, I look at it and say, I have no issue with anybody that's super violent. I don't want to be the subject of a violent crime for sure. I'm less excited about paying a ton of money for people that did like small little things that are victimless crimes, but that's just because I lean on the money side and want it to be really efficient. Let's switch to Franklin County. I'm curious. Let's just start with who made the decision, Franklin County, for this prison that the governor's putting forward?
Yeah, it was the governor and the governor's staff. Even the Board of Corrections, which should have been included in on it, they knew a day ahead of time. I did not know. Now, it is not in my part of Franklin County. I have the Top Bend, Turner's Bend, and Cass, Pig Trail, all that area. So it's my smallest county. So I was not even notified until the press, which was unheard of in the days I came up. You would at least have a representative or senatorial courtesy to include them. I did not know till it popped out in the press. So they didn't even know the citizens. And that is opposite of what the governor and Rose Procuri, her corrections guy, said when he said before a meeting, he said the local community has to embrace it. They totally ignored that and went ahead. And so they announced it. If you back up to 23 session, before even the Franklin County came into picture, the governor promised a $470 million prison and 3,000 beds. That's $156,000 per bed. I knew at that time that was so unrealistic. It was really just literally a farce. And I tell people all the time, these prison building companies, they know, and you see in other states, once they get you hooked for 50 million or 100 million, they've got you hooked for as much as you want to get.
Yep.
This facility in Franklin County, I would tell you, is an extremely expensive place to build. It is on a mountain of rock. It's way out in the middle of the country. There's no road structure. The governor's office did not even call the highway department and discuss, can the roads handle it, which they can't. If you're doing a construction site on this mega scale, you're talking 600 to 800 workers, cranes, thousands of concrete trucks. You're going to have to build new roads in there just to be able to handle the construction. There's no water that we know of. You're going to have to look at water. I mean, they didn't even call the electric cooperative to figure out how to get power into this place. And I used to work for a construction company, and I told people, if I'd have done a deal like this, I'd been fired by noon. That's how incompetent this really situation and a farce, literally. I mean, I'm being honest about how we're going down this path. And I'm just saying we need to relook at everything and debate this thing before we even get started in this too deep.
Yeah. Well, I think if you divide the numbers for what you said, they originally came out as like $150,000 per person. But if we just think about that for a second, right? It's going to be more, you think it's going to be what, $1 billion if you're just guessing?
If you look at a 3,000 bed prison, anything what Alabama's doing, and this is we don't know how tariffs are going to impact this new cost apart. I mean, so you have that added experience. I mean, you're looking at easily, you might as well say 1.5 billion. And I could tell you our state budget can't afford that. We just simply can't.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy about that, if you just divide the numbers, first, if you took that and divided, it's like what, $400,000 per bed. And so that's extraordinarily expensive, when our average cost of a home in Arkansas is probably less than $100,000, and so is 3,000, why 3,000? Is there a magic about 3,000?
Well, I think, and they'll have to speak for themselves. We have 2,000 in county backlog. They want to try to take care of that, which this prison, and the new estimate they're giving, they went up 420 million over weekend. So they came in and said 470 million. And then all of a sudden they went and figured things back out. And now they're saying 825 million. And literally the prison building company just provided a cover letter with no details, no specifics, nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. I can't imagine me coming out and building anybody in a house in Arkansas and saying, oh, by the way, it was or it was 470,000. Now it's 800. It's almost doubled, but I'm not giving you the details. So I mean, it's like any other prison, mega prison around the country. Let me give you an example. Utah, where they started much of it pre-COVID, and before the price explosion, they estimated at 500 something million. It wound up being over $1 billion. Alabama in 21 was going to build 2 4,000 bed prisons for 1.3 billion. They're half done with one right now, and now they're estimated at 1.3 billion. The legislature just gave legislation to borrow 500 million to try and finish it. So that's why these things are never financially feasible, and they're only financially feasible for the prison building companies and those people that are going to take $1 billion and, campaign contribution to all that to get whatever they need. So that's why we've got to look at the whole situation and look at, what can we really afford in this?
Yeah, because
Let's not check.
Go ahead, Matt.
Brian, is it the money still being held up in a budget committee? They have not approved that yet, have they?
Yeah, no, that's one thing. And so Governor Hutchinson, before I came back in, allocated $75 million to expand Calico Rock facility. And then the Board of Corrections, my understanding, went to the governor in 23 and said, well, we can expand 525 beds for $115 million. And that's $215,000 per bed. And my understanding is the governor's office, and I sent them an email to clarify, they turned it down. Their drive was just do this mega prison. So we could have easily, for $115 million, we could have looked at some of these county jail expansions or building and do a state partnership like they did in Phillips County, which is a success, not the ideal situation. But for $200 million, we could have easily expanded up to maybe 800 to 1,000 beds and took care of half this problem. So, some of these questions, the governor's office just quite frankly is not answering or being honest or truthful about any of it.
I'm curious, in your constituents, the reaction was pretty negative, right? I mean, the people in Franklin County weren't excited about having this, or is that true? Is that a true statement?
Yeah. No, I think when people know, you shouldn't be railroading anything. Our government, that's something that should happen in Cuba. I mean, the people that's going to be impacted the most, whether it's my district or your district, your area, the people that should be the first to know, not, they should have a seat at the table with the process. Yeah. And they just didn't have that. That was very unpopular. And, no one really wants a prison. There are areas that do want a prison. Certainly Calico Rock expansion would have been welcomed by those people up there.
Right.
But I will say this, we're going to have to, like Polk County and all these other counties, we're going to have to look at these 8 counties that are making up 2/3 the inmates. A lot of times we're passing jail taxes in counties to take care of stuff. Benton and Washington failing jail taxes. Sebastian County failed jail taxes. Pulaski and Jefferson failing jail taxes. So it's not fair to our other counties to be able to bear the financial burden of these, while these other counties are really, not focusing on that. And we really shouldn't let them run over us. And we should make a deal with them to try and make a better Arkansas that is financially responsible, rather than going in this open checkbook. Every day the figures change. We don't know anything about anything in any details or specifics before we get started. I mean, you wouldn't do that in regular business. I mean,
right.
You wouldn't, and our government shouldn't do that either.
It is classic redistribution, right? You take $1 from you and we put $1 over here, right? For some other project, Matt, what do you think? Do you hear anything, from people related to the prison one way or the other?
Our district's been relatively quiet about it. Of course, I've tried to keep up with the situation in Franklin County. And, one question I have, and Senator King mentioned this, is from what I've heard, is that there are areas in the state that want the prison. And, I heard one story where there's actually a location in South Arkansas that not only wants the prison, but said, hey, we'll give you the land. We'll donate the land of the state for free if you'll build it down here. Have you heard that, Brian?
Yeah, we've heard those situations, and I will tell you, but I will say with all the population growth in Northwest Arkansas, most of these facilities are in the least populated, and we're having staffing problems sometimes in these rural counties with declining population and getting them staffed. So when you look at Benton and Washington County, Crawford County, Sebastian County, a lot of times they're running vans 6 days a week transporting prisoners. That's why it's more economical and better in the long run to put these facilities where who's contributing the most inmates. Number one, it saves on transportation. and handling them. And it would just be the lower level, lower sentenced ones. And the other flip side of it too is the inmates, for example, to try and reduce them recidivism, them committing crime again, is when you have those facilities close to where the population is contributing. If the families want to visit the inmate, if you're in Benton, Washington County, and you're somebody you have in prison is sentenced all the way in Malvern or West Memphis or Calico Rock even, it's all day to get there and all day back. When you keep these inmates of lower sentence closer to that, you allow them to have more impact to their families. Hopefully that's going to reduce and be things better. So it helps on both ends to put the facilities and have more regional facilities rather than put everything in one mega prison, mega financial disaster.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Matt, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's what it comes down to, Andy, is, you're a longtime businessman and that's your passion. And essentially, from my perspective, we essentially passed legislation, and part of that was to build a 3,000 bed prison without first seeing the plan. Where's it going to go? How much is it going to cost? How are you going to build it? And I think that several members of the legislature took for granted that a lot of this had been thoroughly vetted and thought out. And here we sit now in 2025, and we're seeing that that's not necessarily been the case. And there's a lot of questions that myself as well as others would like to have answered, because essentially, Andy, it would be the equivalent of if you and I had a business idea. I mean, whatever, insert whatever. We want to put a Starbucks in Johnson County, and that's just our idea. We know that the customers are there. We know they'll line up. We think that it'll turn a net profit. And yeah, I call you up one day and say, hey, there's some land. It's 1.5 million. It's the proper size and everything. And you say, we're not just going to go buy the land without seeing some groundwork as how we're going to build it, who's going to build it, how we're going to get power, all these things. And just for myself, as just a small business owner perspective, there were a lot of those questions, at least as far as I'm aware, that were not answered before the decision was made to purchase the land in Franklin County.
Well, I would say that, for sure that you're going to get better results if you've got, the right amount of diligence that's done. And so let me see if I can summarize kind of how I think what I'm hearing, which is, look, we recognize that we're high on violent crime, or we recognize we're high on property crime. Even if those numbers over the course of the last, decades have still been declining, we still are high relative to other states. We have a high incarceration rate. We have a higher folks where they go to prison, but they come back out. We've got overcrowding in our current prisons. So I think we agree on those problems, even if the statistics are a little bit different depending on where we're pulling them. But I think what you're also saying is that before we leap into a 3,000 bed facility in Franklin County, let's make sure that we've thought through all of the different angles, the proper costs, the proper location, the proper citizen support, as well as some of these other things that you mentioned, these intangibles, like, can we reduce recidivism if we've got more family involvement, and you're closer to the community that you once lived in? Am I close to it? Is that what you, Senator, am I kind of close?
Yeah. And, Matt brought up the business aspect, and Matt and I talk about it in your business aspect. So we decide basically whatever policy it is, doesn't matter. Take the names of anything that you want to do out there. We decide basically four things. We decide who gets, who gives, who pays, and the other factor that comes into politics is who profits. So if you look at the situation of like Starbucks, for example, you and Matt may go say, hey, we're going to give Johnson County this Starbucks. We're going to, employ 25 employees. It's going to cost this much. We're going to go to the bank, figure out, the bank's going to get us the money. We're going to figure out all this stuff, and it's going to be you profit or you loss into it. Well, in this aspect, these mega prison building companies, these private prisons, are mega huge donors. I mean, you're talking about them, they're going to cash out $1 billion+ in this. So they're coming in and they want to confuse the situation. They don't want to get down to the nuts and bolts and peel everything away to the real decision. And they try and confuse things. That's why you see right now, we've seen the figure go from $470 million to $825 million with no price on the beds. So, they're saying they said 3,000 beds to try and pacify everybody in the backlog that we know we got to take care of. In reality, we don't know. Let me just tell you, honestly, I keep saying these things, and somebody said, Brian, if you were 1 ounce wrong, they would be shoving an elephant through a keel on you. There won't be 500 prisoners up there. We also look at the labor aspect of this place in Franklin County. It's way out in the country. I mean, I would love to live there because there's less people there. And the idea that you're going to get 800 people out there to staff that is literally a farce.
Yeah. Yeah. You've made some really good points. And look, one of the things I'd definitely applaud you on is standing up, right? Sometimes it's so hard when you got all the political will going one way to stand up and even just say, why are we doing this? Right. And so, and trying to bring a little bit of sanity to the whole thing. Thank you very much for coming today. Any final thoughts from Matt, from you or Senator that you'd like to say?
Well, I'll just say, I think at the end of the day, with my background and with Senator King's background, he grew up in a family business such as I, and Andy, you've been a, businessman for decades. I think the three things, or the main thing that we three have in common, is we look at the bottom line and how we're going to get there and what makes sense. And I think in this case, I think we all recognize that there's a problem with crime in the state of Arkansas. We need to figure out various solutions. I definitely agree with Senator King's thoughts of, there's got to be some changes on the front end that I'm not sure government can do. I mean, you've got to change people's hearts and minds, and they've got to be willing to change to make the decision not to go there in the first place. I'm not sure what role government can have to help with that, but that's a societal issue. But I think at the end of the day, I think everyone's heart's in the right place. It's just how we're going to get there.
Sure. Senator, any final thoughts before we?
Yeah, I want to touch on the high crime rate because we're talking about prisons, and that's the shiny object right now, and the mass confusion about you can't get honest answers out of the governor's office or figures. The big thought about the high crime rate. So my bill first is to take $100 million of general revenue of sales tax, a dedicated revenue stream, hire 400 to 600 public safety officers. Their only role would be to reduce crime, help probation parole, which is underfunded, overworked, and help them with repeat offenders making visits that they would be patrolling in high crime areas in some places that we mentioned. So, we've got to get the police presence back out there where people know that people are watching, and they know in these areas, they know that the police is already overworked and overburdened. So this would allow them, it would also help with the discrepancies in Polk County or any other county where the county sheriff can hire a deputy in the county and they make far less than cities even, or the state police. So my bill would help each county equalize that pay to help them where they retain officers. A lot of times counties in every county, Arkansas, they'll get a young officer or somebody that moves in, they'll take them to law enforcement academy, they invest them, and within a year to 3 years, they've moved on to a city making more money. We have that. So my bill would equalize that pay and dedicate these officers in whatever county to actually reduce crime and make communities safer.
Got it. Thank you very much, because I know those are a lot of issues we didn't get to, and we could have gone a lot further. So, for example, here in Polk County, I know the county prison's a big deal.
Yeah.
Senator King, thank you very much for taking the time. You guys, I know, have to get back to the session. What I'll just remind anybody is freearkansas.com. You can see all the statistics we've got. We'll push things out on our social media channels, and feel free to comment on anything. So with that, I'll wish you guys a great Monday. Have a good one, and thank you very much.